Now that we've added the admin views to the component, let's look at some of the features that is still available inside of components. As you can see, adding your custom admin views is done there, and the site views is done here. Then there is a custom admin menus. Now this don't let this throw you out. Controlling the menu structures for these custom admin views and the site views are done inside of these. This is if you are actually adding custom backend views which hasn't been developed inside of Component Builder. So for example, Component Builder itself has a compiler view. You all have seen that. If I quickly go there, it's this view here. Now this whole view is done outside of Component Builder. I actually, this is just hand-coded little script that kicks off a bunch of events. Now it needs a model, it needs a controller, so I wrote that with my, just manually with hand coding. And it also needs a view, and so basically the view and everything in regards to it, if you look at my infrastructure of Component Builder, you would see that I have, let me just look at this compiler, I have a place called custom. You see, now inside of custom is where everything that you want to include inside of your component is added into the custom folder. So any files, any folders, anything that you want to integrate is in here. Now you might look there and see there are a bunch of things already there, and I would encourage you not to remove them, because depending on what you do in Component Builder, it will automatically include those, especially the food tables and the import view and the UI kit, and I think I'm not sure, I think you would have Sound Manager as well. That is for Sermon Distributor. And then PHP Excel, which is the use for the exporting of data to a spreadsheet and importing it from a spreadsheet. We're using this library. So all of that is in the custom tab. And then you will see a bunch of files as well. Now the Component Builder itself has its compiler view here. And so as you can see, it's basically just empty folders. And then I have the actual files here as well. There's the default compiler file, which is then, if I open it up, it's basically the script that shows that little drop down of items. And I have that in there. And I also have the controller somewhere. Let's scroll down. Obviously it should compiler, there's the controller, there's the model, there is the compiler as well, the helper file, and so I am including that into my component. If we look here, let me open Component Builder quickly, go to settings. In files, I'm including a bunch of things, and that also means I'm including that. Here it is, the compiler, and I'm saying take this file and put it in admin views compiler and view and rename it. See, it's got the wrong name here, so if you add the right name at the end of the string and click yes, it will rename that file to this. So that is adding custom files and as well as custom folders. So I'm grabbing the compiler views and I'm dumping it into views, and I'm also say rename it to compiler. So compiler views becomes compiler inside of the views folder. And then obviously the system will first build the folders and then move your data, your files, to those folders. So you will put the files here and then have the system do the folders, and then it will move the files. Okay, so that's adding custom files to any component. And this custom admin menu is basically what I use to map the compiler menu. So I would say I want to call it compiler. The code is compiler. I'm not using a link because it's not another extension or another website or something like that, which you can also do. And then I would select an icon. Here is the information. And it's the same kind of switches as you see with adding a custom admin, a backend admin view. You can tweak whether it should be an admin menu or be on a dashboard and be a sub menu. So you can tweak that. And then also in which order behind, it says select before what admin view this one should be placed. Now that we are placing it before component, so that means it can go at the very top. Okay, so that is adding a custom admin menu because of custom files and folders that you have created by hand and are importing into your component when you compile it. The same is done with the compiler of component builder. I'm actually including it as files. So there is the compiler. Let me see. Oh, you know what? I took all the compiler files and I put it in a folder called compiler. There it is. And so it's a folder which moves all the files at once. That obviously can also be done. Like for example, as you see here, PHP Excel, which is a folder, has a lot of content in it. If we were to open it, you'd see it has all these files and folders and things. And so I put everything I wanted to move inside of this folder, and then in my component I simply target that folder and it pulls it in. Whoop. Okay, so that's simply showing you how I've added a whole lot of folders to component builder, and then when I need a backend admin view customly added, this feature here does that for me. Now I also want to quickly cover the area called config. You see, this area deals with something that is actually quite useful, and that is to set up your backend global fields. Now let me go out of this one because it's definitely not the best demonstration. Let me go to Summon Distributor. There we've done some really amazing things. Summon Distributor. Okay, settings and then config. And as you can see, it is a very long list of things. But then if we go to the actual component, let me open it, and then I'll click on options, you'd see that it has many tabs. Okay, and all of these switches are done in the config area. All of them, except some of these defaults, which is added by the simple switches. For example, the global timer. Remember we spoke about the check-in. Here you can set it whether it should be every 5 hours, 12 hours, once a day, every second day, once a week, or never. Checking in your items automatically. The version control buttons are added automatically as well, which means the person can set the version control on or off, and also set how many records should be set. If 0, then all versions will be saved. And so this is the version control. And then the author area is also added automatically, and you can, when you click in the component here, let me just close this long thing. You see here is a contributing area. You can set whether you want to add empty contributing level fields. Here you can add contributors, as many as you like, those who are involved with developing your component. And then the amount of empty ones you want to leave there is also tweakable, and that will basically let me show you, add this area here, contributor 1, 2, 3, 4, and when you use this switch, it controls whether it's been shown in the back or the front and all these kind of features, which I'm not going to go into much depth now. But they also add it automatically, and also the permission structure is added automatically. And if you have in the component, you can actually set that it includes UIKit. You can set that to yes. If you do that, it automatically adds this feature to your component, and everywhere where UIKit is used. Okay, so everything else, this Dropbox, preacher, categories, category, series list, and series and sermons is all done through that config area here. Now, to add fields to the config area, you first need to add that field to fields. So you would go to fields, and whatever field you want to use there, you need to create here. So you first create the fields, then obviously you need to remember the system name that you're using, because then when you open up this, you would be able to type in the name and it will be selected, and then by convention the tab name, as long as you use the same tab name, it will be bundled in the order of which you set it here. So this is where the Dropbox area, all their fields are being set. Now the reason why we include these demo component into the application with the tutorial is that you can go and look and see, okay, well, he's using Dropbox update method here, and then you can go look at this file, and then you can go look at how it looks here, the Dropbox update method, and the files and the text, and even some of this. I mean, here's a button that if I click it, it starts an update, and it even shows it here. Now, how to do that is very tricky. It's not that simple to do that, because we're not inside of our component. As you can see, we're actually in the config component, in the global, if you have global settings. So this whole feature that is built into Sermon Distributor is so smart, I would tell you. For you to be able to do that is just stunning. So you can look at how I've done that by simply going to these fields, and you would find the answer to how did you do that. And you can look at these things in this list view. So all the Dropbox information is there, and then there is some global, like local folder, download link, and then space HR. You can see that I have that space HR quite often. It's a field that it will be included in the paid version of of Component Builder. It already has that spacer HR in it, and since spacers, you can use the same spacer over and over. The system will automatically increment it so that it doesn't have conflict in name conventions. So I'm just using the same spacer everywhere, putting spacers, which is this little line. You see that little line there? It's very very small, but it gives a space between these areas. That is how I'm doing that. Then also you can put default values which will be used during installation of the component. So if you have switches in your config that you want to populate with default values, you just add those values here, and then during the install, those values will be added to the database, and the Component Builder puts all that in place for you. So this is where you add the config fields. And there's another convention which is maybe not it's not that obvious, but I added a convention that if you use a tab name which is exactly the same as a front end view, then I will add this field to that front end view's menu. Now, if you can see it, if you think about Joomla's content manager, it does the same thing. In the global setting of your article manager, you can set features for categories and for articles. But if you create a new article in a menu item, then you can override those. You can say use global, or you can override them. Now, this feature of using the same tab name, so let's look at this. The feature's name is Preacher Switch, whether it should be a table or a grid. Okay, and we've set the default to 2, and we called it Preachers, plural. That's quite important. Now, let's look at the front. I'm going to close this out. Okay, here I have a bunch of menus. I'm going to go to a menu that I've already created called Preachers. And then I'm also going to go to this component's backend called Preachers. So you see there is a list of items. Now all I did in the component builder is I simply added the name Preacher as the tab name. That's all I did. And then the fields. So there is the list of the fields from there to there. These are the fields. You can see them here. And these fields I simply created in the field area with field types. So it's basically some radio buttons, a drop down list, another drop down list, and again some radio button. Okay, so these are the fields. And then in the view, if you click on Summon Distributor, you see those exact same fields, and it has the option of using the global instead. So there's use global, or you can override it. So you can decide, okay, this specific admin view I want to use grid and not the global option. So that whole system of adding this extra features to every item view of the front end is integrated simply by a convention. If the front end is called Preachers, which in this case it is, as you can see there, it's called Preachers. Yeah, I just selected a menu item called Preachers. Now we haven't dealt with setting up your site views and all that, so this might be how did you get that item name right and everything, but I'm trying to sketch a picture which we will revisit when we eventually get to this area. But this, just that you know from where it comes, it's simply in the config. I added the files and used the convention of the actual front end page. It has a name called Preachers, and so there is as well for Preacher, which is single. So if I closed our select Summon Distributor and then select Preacher, which is another view, and then I clicked here, you see all these switches, they're also mapped in here from there all the way to there, and they have some default values, and there are the fields. And in the back end of the component, if I click on Preacher, here is the same fields. So you can set global settings, and then you can override them, in the menu itself by not using global. So that this whole feature is possible through this config little tab. So it looks insignificant, I suppose, and you might not expect it. Like I said, it's not that obvious that it does this, but that is what it is doing. And so as you can see, all of those certain areas, I just mapped it in config, and because of the name of the tab, let me stress that, because of the name of the tab, the system knows, oh, so this is related to any front-end menus as well. Therefore, it will automatically create those front-end things for you. Now, to show you how it is done is quite simple. Not that I want to teach you how the Joomla API works, but I want you to at least know what it is doing. So I'm going to go to the front of this component. Here it is. And I'm going to open that view. preachers, and you'd see in template there is a extra file called default XML, and then I'll open that default XML. Basically all component builder is doing is it is adding the convention to this file. So if you are running into troubles and it's not working as you expected, this is the file in which you can come and look to see what's happening. That is in the front end, in views, in the specific view that you have. So it must be this view, must be the tab name, and then in that file called default XML. Obviously, and this is important, since we haven't dealt with adding site views, this site views here, I need to quickly touch on it so that you at least know something that relates to this. And that is, if you didn't click on add as a menu, that if you set this to no, then that file will not exist. Okay, so that file only exists if this is set to yes. So setting it to yes tells component builder to build this default XML file, and setting the tabs to the same name as this view tells component builder to add those fields to this view and make it so that your user can then have unique implementation. Obviously, and this is important, it doesn't make use of this information necessarily inside of your site view. You need to make use of this information in your site view. Now, if you're a developer, you would expect that, right? You would know, oh yeah, okay, so inside of your component, you have a place where you check params header, should it show, then it shows it, and it basically you're getting it from the parameters. Now parameters are set inside of the view.html.php. You see here we set the parameters. We do this app get parameters. Now this actually gets all the parameters in relation to this view. It gets the component parameters, it gets the menu parameters, and it automatically, if it has the custom, so I feel like I'm maybe going beyond the scope, but if they've used global, it will automatically fall back on what is set here, which is excellent. So you're using the same name, display and display. Where is it? It's the same name. And so if you're using global, basically what parameters does is it's getting displays parameter. The display field, it's getting that parameter. And it first looks at the menus settings, and if that one is set to global, it automatically falls back to the global settings. That is done by Joomla itself. It's not really something I built. It's just the way Joomla works, which is excellent. And that means that you immediately, by using params and then doing a checkup, so remember now this value is inside of this params, and if I then go to the default view, and let's see, where am I implementing some of that? Let's go to here, the preacher display. Okay, so the field name wasn't just display, I'm sorry, it was called preachers display. That's the field name in the global configurations. So if you're not with me, it is what we used for this field. Switch preacher table grid. It's called preacher display. So if I was to go and open this field, in fact, let me do that so that you see the whole picture. Switch preachers table grid. Let me just remember that. Okay, so here is the list of the switch preachers fields, and as you can see, I'm in the fields tab, and I'll open that specific field, and you'd see that the name of that the name of this field is preachers underscore display. Now you need to make sure that none of the fields have the same name. Uh, that is quite important. And what I mean by none of the fields, I mean this field must not be the same name as that field. Every field in this global area must be unique. It should never overlap. And so that is why I use the convention of preacher's display, so that I can also use preacher without the S display, and I can use category underscore display, and you see, so that I have that sort of convention of implementation. You should all around, as you develop, think about conventions, using sort of logical, repetitive, scalable concepts. And so this is one of them that I've done. And then I just added it here, so it's that specific item. And then in the global area, you go to preachers. It is basically this view here. Sorry, field. This field here. And in the code, I'm simply saying, if preacher equals 1, then show the table. If preacher display equals 2, then show the grid. And if none is selected, then show the list, which is the 3 options. If you look at the button has table, grid, and list. And so I'm not asking, does the global have this or that? None of that. I'm just calling the field directly, because the way the Joomla gets that initial data, like I showed you here, is they sort that out for you. And that's quite nice. And I've obviously tested and made sure that my explanation is the truth. And so goes with the colors. You can see here I again just do parameters, get colors. But this is actually knowledge that you would have if you have developed a component for Joomla. You would know about these tricks, I suppose. And I'm just showing to you how Component Builder makes it easy to implement these kind of things, which otherwise would take so much time to write this up and then make sure it's exactly the same inside of the XML for the menu and so forth. So Component Builder does all of that out of this config file, simply with a convention that relates to the actual front end. And that is as simple as that. Okay, so I think we've covered that thoroughly enough, and that will be all for this tutorial. I will continue looking at more concepts of the component and its features. Possibly it might be ideal for us to stop here with the component and go look at setting up a custom admin view, or setting up a site view. And yet I'm thinking, you know, if we go that route, it's going to take us on a very long road. So the ideal would be, let me sort of dealt with some of this component features first and finish that. And then as soon as we've finished it, we'll jump into the custom, very nice area of your front-end development and custom admin development. And then we will obviously be relating back to what we have discussed here as we go. So I've now looked at the setting tab and tried to cover as much of this area as I can. I didn't talk much about the MySQL tweak. This is a very advanced feature, and you can know that what it really does. If you have dummy data, you're able to exclude them through this area. So that if you have different versions, you will, through this MySQL tweak, be able to exclude certain information, which I realize it's a little bit advanced, and so for most cases people will just not use this. It's only when you start having multiple versions of the same extension and you're selling them at different pricing, and you want to be able to, from within Component Builder, just export the different versions, then you start using this feature. And I think we'll possibly deal with it when we start looking at more advanced implementations. Okay, well, thank you for watching. We'll start in the next run with scripts.